Hey, how you doing? Wow, episode 100. Holy cow, how long have we been doing this? Well, we took a 6-month break for a little while so that I could write that white paper for MIT and Georgia Tech and then turn it into that book. And so we've been doing this about 3 years. If you've been along for the whole ride, oh, my condolences to you. We've covered a lot of ground, huh? So my plans for the episode 100 today were to have Whitney and Declan on with me, but Whitney has a sinus infection and can't really talk, nor does she feel like talking, and then Declan's away at school today. So it's just going to be you and me again. And today we're going to take a little bit deeper dive into the science of meditation and spiritual enlightenment, which is going to be a treat. And at the very end of the show, I'm going to have an awesome scientific tip for you meditators out there, which should be most, if not all of you. Go. Hey, this is the I Am Podcast, where we answer all the questions about spirituality and inner peace that you ever wanted to ask, and where we discover the secrets of humanity and divinity through a better understanding of both. I'm your host, Sean Webb. Okay, so how the heck are you today? I hope you're doing well. Today, we're going to give you a little bit better understanding of why meditation is important and the phenomenon behind spiritual enlightenment, the thing that can come about due to regular meditative practices or those spiritual awakenings, that type of thing. There is a scientific explanation for those types of things. And so let's get into that. Okay, so for episode 99/19, we talked about the phenomenon of spiritual enlightenment. And we didn't really take a super deep dive on the science behind it all. And so we're going to complete that incomplete sentence with this episode here to discuss a little bit of the science behind spiritual enlightenment and why these spiritual awakenings occur within our brains. Okay, so in the Body, Mind, Spirit 101, we talked a lot about the ego, the false self, the me, if you want to pull in episode 6, which is really popular. And it is the construct of our perception of self that we have within our heads that all emotions are then compared to. Our expectations and our preferences and the equation of emotion come in relation to our sense of self and the things that we attach to that create our world. So that fills the EP, and then our perception fills the RP, and from there we create positive or negative emotions based on the rule sets that we explained in the Body, Mind, Spirit 101. Okay, so first we'll talk about a couple of comparative science references to the Body, Mind, Spirit 101 stuff that we had talked about previously, and then we'll talk about the brain specifically and how that can help us understand a little bit more about our spirituality and our emotional process and how to calm all of that noise down. All right? First, we started out the Body, Mind, Spirit 101 a while back, and we're continuously talking about what I am calling the cognitive attachment map. And basically it's that map of attachments that we have that create our sense of self, our sense of being, our me. And then those attachments feed into the equation of emotion, creating the expectations and the preferences about each of those attachments. And then you compare that with the reality as you're perceiving something from the world coming in, and then those things either jive or they don't jive, and that creates positive or negative emotion. And then, of course, specific emotions based on the variables in the equation of emotion and where they come from and that type of thing. If you want to understand much better how that works from a neuroscientific standpoint, you can read one of two books. Dan Siegel has a book called Mindsight, which he calls them Mindsight maps, but basically everyone is now jumping on board that mapping is a function of the prefrontal cortex, the mapping of the self, the mapping of the me. And also there's another book called Self Comes to Mind by Antonio Damasio. And he uses a different name, but basically it's the same thing. It's a cognitive attachment map of the prefrontal cortex that creates our perceptions of self. So it's from there in the prefrontal cortex that a lot of our stuff is created. A lot of our expectations and our preferences are created. Now, regarding the ego and the me specifically, your sense of self, your who you are. The portion of your brain that creates your me, your sense of self, is basically housed in three different areas that are all kind of right next to each other in your brain. And they're housed in what's called the default mode network. And the default mode network is made up of three areas. You have the medial prefrontal cortex, which is kind of in front, but not very front, and down just a little bit. And then you have the medial parietal cortex, which is just in back of it, basically up in here, right, kind of on the top and approaching the back of your head. And then you have the medial temporal lobes, which are basically below that same area up there. And all those three sections tie together, and they create the conscious stream of thought that occurs in your waking consciousness and also creates your sense of self, your you. Now, the neuroscience behind the default mode network is that when left unchecked, it starts to create a large deal of chatter. Okay, now, why that's important is that when the chatter starts occurring up here, a large number of mental health issues can arise. Now, from a neuroscience standpoint, when the default mode network starts to get too much chatter going on up here, it starts to strengthen the connections into other parts of the brain, which is not necessarily a good thing. That means your ego starts taking over more portions of your brain, including the area right next to it, right under it, which is called the anterior cingulate cortex. Now, the anterior cingulate cortex is the thing that basically creates fear, the front part of the limbic system, and also processes pain, both psychological and physical pain. And so when your ego or your sense of self or your default mode network starts to tap into more of your fear and pain, it creates more fear and pain in your life. Now, your anterior cingulate cortex, if you wanted to poke at it, you'd go about 2 inches in this way and about 1 inch in this way, and down below that, oh, I've gone too far. Oh, get it? Poking at the fear center of your brain. Okay, neuroscience humor is not so funny. But when your me center of your brain is left to chatter and go uncontrolled, that's when it starts to increase activity in your anterior cingulate cortex, increasing fear, increasing anxiety, increasing psychological pain. Now, according to Dr. Charles Rayson at Emory University, when the default mode network goes into hyperactivity, a number of things are the result, including depression. And in fact, he says when you do a brain scan on everybody that has depression, you're going to see hyperactivity in the default mode network. And that's one of the things that is common among people that have depression. And when the default mode network is noisy and it's pressing on the fear and emotional pain center of the brain, then it increases the depression. So what do we need to do? We need to release the tension, release the chatter, quiet this whole section of your brain. How do we do that? Well, one of the things that has been proven to reduce the noise in the default mode network is meditation through thousands of studies at this point. Meditation regulates theta waves. There are 4 kinds of waves in your brain. There are delta, the deep sleep, theta, which are the waves that are kind of in the middle here where your default mode network is, your alpha waves, which are in the very front and very back of your brain, and then beta waves, which are the highest frequency waves. Now, when you regulate theta waves through meditation, and this is something that's been proven through hundreds of studies, when you regulate theta waves, it regulates the activity in your default mode network, thus lessening the effect of your me, your ego. And when you regulate your alpha waves, it also then creates a great deal of wakeful rest within your mind. Now there's that word rest. Don't make any assumptions that resting without meditating is good for you, like turning your brain off, because actually studies show when you turn your brain off, when you try to zone out, when you just watch TV or you do something that is not really active for your brain, yeah, that default mode network, that thing that causes so much pain and suffering for us in our lives, that goes nuts. That increases activity. So taking vacation or relaxing or turning your brain off is actually not doing you any good. In fact, studies have shown that meditators do much more good to their alpha and theta wave regulation than anyone who's trying to just take a load off. You need to take control to be able to regulate your theta and alpha brainwaves in your default mode network, your me. Now, the cool thing there is plasticity over time in as short as 8 weeks is going to help you do that. You don't have to just meditate and meditate and meditate, 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 meditate to keep it going. You meditate and it gets additive because of the changes that your brain makes to its own brain structure. You start to prune the neural pathways that are destructive, and you start to grow the neural pathways that help you regulate your default mode network. So meditation, key. We talked about that in the last few podcasts. Massachusetts General showed that brainwave changes occur permanently in as little as 8 weeks. So do it for a little while and it will help you. What are the other things that we can do? Well, your endogenous DMT, believe it or not, the most powerful psychedelic on the planet that you create in your own head, that will help reduce the noise in the default mode network. Now, why does it do that? Well, the release of endogenous DMT during waking hours, dimethyltryptamine is DMT, the release of that chemical in your brain throws everything into overdrive, especially the stuff in here. Now, what happens when that occurs is that excitotoxins are released, specifically glutamate. And in his book, John Horgan, Rational Mysticism, explains how the overstimulation of these areas up here can actually etch out and destroy the neural pathways that create a lot of your issues, a lot of our pain and suffering, a lot of our problems. And that's why spiritual enlightenment, quote unquote, is such a transformative power and experience in people's lives when they find it. Because if you can get to that point where your conscious thought ceases and the release of this endogenous DMT is flooded into your bloodstream and overstimulates these cortical areas of your brain that have been causing problems, neurons die. And that's a good thing because it's a natural process that is causing a reduction in pain and suffering, a reduction in that influence of the me in your brain. So now we potentially have a scientific explanation of what exactly occurs when the enlightenment process comes into being. The DMT is released, the overstimulation occurs, the glutamatergic storm, which is the scientific term that I couldn't think of for a second, then occurs and neurons and their pathways are etched into non-existence, thus helping you calm that me, calm that ego, calm that negative influence that is causing you potentially pain and suffering and other mental issues that could extend all the way into depression. In fact, psilocybin, which is a chemical compound very similar to DMT, but it's found in nature, it's found in mushrooms, psilocybin is used to a highly effective degree on people who have depression, are experiencing depression, are a victim of depression, and they're experiencing a huge benefit by putting a chemical within their brain that is almost identical to DMT except for a couple of atoms into this system that is designed to help you improve who you are and be a happier person naturally. Now, psilocybin's been studied a number of times, including this Johns Hopkins study that took a number of folks and dosed them with psilocybin, and in a double-blind study, they did so with placebo as well. The results of this study, that they had this chemical that was so very similar to DMT, fits within the same keyhole receptors in your brain for DMT. So the psilocybin fits into the stuff that the DMT stuff fits into. So you have a similar type of experience. The folks who were in that study, 34% of them, just over a third, let's say a third of them reported that to be the most profound and positive experience of their entire life. 1/3 of the people said that over everything they've ever experienced. Now, here's the other mind-blowing statistic out of that study. In the same study, almost 60% rated that same experience in the top 5 most important of their entire lifetimes. Not necessarily above the kids being born, but right there. Yeah, so 60% said they had a substantial personal meaning out of the experience and spiritual significance. That's how profound that these test subjects reported their experience to be with this chemical that is very close to what you're creating in your brain naturally, and what, if you can get to release during waking hours, will help you with the scientific process that we just explained, with the etching away of the ego, the etching away of the pathways in the default mode network, and the quieting of the mind, and the ability to wake to those things that exist when all this noise is shut down. Now, you don't necessarily have to take psychedelics to be able to get that experience, because if you can get your conscious thought processes to quiet to a point of non-thought, then I believe it occurs naturally. I believe that the DMT is then released within your system and then does all that positive stuff to your brain. In fact, the psilocybin studies show that psilocybin basically helps shut this whole area down. And the brain scans that they did while the people were under the psilocybin effect were basically almost devoid of this whole area up here. So they did it chemical first, which shut down the portion of the brain. But if you can get it to where you are regulating that area of the brain and getting it shut down, then the DMT within your head will follow and your enlightenment experience will occur. Isn't that awesome? Now it's not just woo-woo, hairy-fairy spirituality stuff. Now it's hardcore science. Okay, so let's talk about the scientific tip for meditators and close this episode out. By the way, I've never taken a psychedelic in my life, although I am going to, now that I have experienced enlightenment naturally through the endogenous DMT release, and I'm going to compare it to the other entheogens and catalysts that can help create those type of euphoric experiences. So stay tuned for that in the next 100 episodes. Okay, so the scientific tip for meditators, we're going to throw in a little psychiatric science. 2007, a UCLA study done by Matthew Liebran shows that naming emotions can tame emotions. And 30 people under fMRI showed pics of people's expressions, and they chose the positive or negative emotion words for those expressions. The right ventrolateral and prefrontal cortex, thinking of words, fired up, the amygdala fired up. But if among the test participants who then named the emotion correctly on the faces of the other folks, immediately that portion of their brain shut off or quieted down a little bit from the folks who were simply observing and not naming. So here's what I want you to try in your meditation. This is going to be a variance of the Vipassana meditation, and Vipassana is the type of meditation where it's the mindfulness meditation. You're sitting there and you're watching your thoughts and you're just observing and you're not judging and you're not making any thought to create more thought. Here's what I want you to do. I want you to add one simple process to that. If you see something in your mind, a thought comes into your mind, I want you to then take the conscious action of naming it and then letting it go. Because science is telling us from this UCLA study that if we name it and let it go, that section of our brain that caused that thought to occur, or that emotion to occur, that feeling to occur, then calms and quiets. Now, the key is to create the naming process as quickly as possible and then let it go. And then just let it release and don't think of it. Don't try to think of different names. Don't think of, like a thesaurus. Like this could be, hate, anger, rage, bad feeling, whatever. Just name something that comes into your mind and immediately let it go. Don't try to get the best word. Don't try to get better words. Don't try to think of how many words you could get for this thing and now how many times you could name it or think of a more accurate description. Just name it and let it go. Bird, gone. Dog bark, gone. What am I going to do tomorrow? Gone. Name it, let it go. That'll help you with your meditation, I'm pretty sure, because science says it will. So do that, give it a shot, let me know how it goes. Okay, so next week we're going to respond to a couple of issues that were sent in via email. Thank you. Keep sending those in if you'd like me to respond. I hope things are well for you guys. Don't forget, you can get a free book by going to audible.com and using our code. It's audibletrial.com/IamSpirituality. You get a free audiobook that you can check out and keep forever, even if you don't keep the subscription. I've been a member for over 6 years now. They're awesome. I will never stop my Audible subscription. And if you could, don't forget to stop by iTunes, give us a rating on iTunes and a review. That is much appreciated. It helps people find us. Share this with your friends and family and those you wish to have a larger level of inner peace and a lower level of stress. Hope things are well for you guys. I love you. Talk to you soon. Peace.